Catherine. Hold on, I'll try to get this out of my way before I unfortunately trip on it and fall and make it a memorable Café Scientifique for all. I want to thank you all for coming here tonight. I'm surprised to see people actually here in this weather, which in Memphis, I believe, we shut down the entire city when it rains and foggy like that. So I admire your tenacity in the face of rain. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the Genomics Forum for welcoming me. They have been an absolutely amazing host, and it's been such a wonderful opportunity for me. And I mean, they do really fantastic job, so please support them and show up to their events. My plug for the Genomics Forum. Yeah, they rock, they really do rock. And I will tell you a little bit about myself. My PhD is actually in communication with a specific emphasis on media studies and cultural studies. I am particularly have been always interested in the ways that popular culture and popular narratives engage with science, technology, and medicine. So my background is in that. I have started about 4 or 5 years ago, look at the new emerging trends of personal genomics, which is genomics as they come online and become available for everyone to participate, specifically looking at it through the new media lens, to say what does it mean to go online, to take our mobiles, to take our computers, and donate our genetic data online. This has led me in some very particularly uninteresting ways to write a book about pandemics in the media. It's a jump, I know. Academic life is interesting that way. And in this book, and it's very much a work in process, and we can talk about it more during question and answers if you wish, I'm really interested in the ways that in the last 12 years, since 21st century, how our discourses and conversations about pandemics have changed as the global environment has changed. And by global environment, I mean both the geopolitical spheres, the economic spheres, the social spheres, but also the technological spheres. We have experienced an almost unprecedented amount of technological change and technological speeding up in the last 12 years, and it is really interesting to me in general how our understanding and conception of disease has changed throughout all of that. My side interest is also in monsters. And I say that is because I am incapable of explaining any of this without evoking monstrous narratives of the last decade. And I will do so, I will maybe even reenact some of them. And partially because I always come equipped with video clips and I can't show anything, so I'm gonna have to describe it, right? And specifically, I'm really interested how is all of this conversation about disease and illness and pandemics and epidemics, how it produces difference, how it produces those who are not like us, those who are deemed sick or different or weird or monstrous, and what is it that we decide to do with them at the end of the day. So this is kind of an overview of what I am going to talk about. Please stop me if you can't hear me or understand me or any of those things. So since I can't show you a story, I will tell you a story. And I want to tell a story of the development of the progression of disease and pandemics in our culture. And specifically the story I want to tell begins with Typhoid Mary, which I don't know how many of you know who Typhoid Mary was. But Typhoid Mary was, in the World Wars, a figure used by United States government, and I'm not sure if by UK government as well, to essentially prevent soldiers from doing things they're not supposed to do abroad and catching all sorts of diseases. Because syphilis was expensive for the military, essentially. And the figure of Typhoid Mary was this idea that, you can go abroad and you can find a girl and she may look clean, but she's not clean. And there's all sorts of posters that are portray, very, wholesome-looking women with slogans saying, "But you don't know what's inside of her." They're really actually quite brilliant and freely available online. The reason I want to start with that is because to me this is an illustrative point. How in the 20th century our conversations, cultural conversations, and by our conversations I mean Western world conversations about disease and illness and epidemics have been very much shaped by the understandings of the infected bodies. So the idea there was a disease out there and it was concentrated in a particular person or particular persons. And what we had to do is somehow quarantine them, somehow seclude them, and somehow put them somewhere where we don't have to touch them or interact with them at all. So it was all about managing and preventing difference for spilling out in general population. And as such, it served very much political means. One of the best examples, and by best I mean one of the saddest examples of the 20th century is of course HIV/AIDS pandemic. HIV/AIDS pandemic has served as nothing but an excuse, and I know my politics shines through right now, but an excuse to marginalize and exclude populations and continents from the rest of the world. So, and again, I'm telling the narrative from a very particular United States perspective because that's where I'm kind of from, but in the United States, when HIV/AIDS epidemic began, has been a discrimination and exclusion against the gay populations, the Haitian populations, the drug user population, and other populations who were deemed unclean and unholy. This has translated into politics in many different ways. It took Ronald Reagan 5 years to even mention the word AIDS into the epidemic, and it has took in extraordinarily acts of bravery on the part of gay activists and an organization called ACT UP to actually draw attention to, and demand actual medications and actual participation of the government in that cause. What you have seen since is the migration of the AIDS discourse as an exclusionary discourse onto the continent of Africa. And how, at least in the US media, how Africa has been portrayed as a sort of dark, diseased continent that we need to go to and fix somehow. This of course has very much public health implications, because the work of preventing AIDS in Africa did not work for a very long time, because it was run by very well-intentioned people who thought that they could just go to that continent, to different countries, and tell people how to have sex and what to do. And they will automatically do that because, well, they were told what to do. And of course that did not work. That did not work because, of course, sexual behavior, as any other behavior, is steeped in deep cultural understandings of gender and of sexuality, of masculinity and femininity and family, and you can't really go against that. So there's many years where any work of preventing AIDS in Africa, or at least putting in safe sexual practices, safe drug use practices, have failed miserably because of this failure to account for difference in a respectful way. Specifically, the prevention efforts have adjusted since and have been a lot more successful since, but still in our narratives you see still particularly images of, poor women with children, or different types of people who are then portrayed as other, as a way of talking this pandemic as ultimately a disease of the other, of someone who is outside of the appropriate behaviors that are appropriate of the nation state, and whose citizenship is in question because of their diseased bodies. Something that I have argued happens during that time, during those type of conversations, is that the bodies of the citizens become stand-in for the bodies of the nation state. So you see the public health discourses around diseases in the 20th century that essentially say you have to keep yourself clean if you want to keep the nation state clean. Your body, your citizenship is that of the nation state. If the citizens' bodies are unclean, that means that the nation state is unclean and therefore can be treated as such. And it is and to me this is a very important point, because what I want to address is how that changes in the 21st century. So I painted this picture. I want to paint a picture of what's been happening in the last 12 years, which is SARS, avian flu, swine flu. I refuse to call it H1N1 because swine flu is much more fun to say, and mad cow diseases, but let's stick to just the three big ones: SARS, avian flu, and swine flu. I almost said H1N1 too. They get me good. So what you see in the last 12 years, and I don't think anyone can really argue this, is this essentially what I believe to be a global panic about the loss of control. Is the fact that there's new diseases that are popping up, terrorism is, at its all-time high, and technologies are erupting, and we can't really control anything. And to me, and this is where I reenact the scene from one of my favorite monster films, which should be familiar to some of you, called 28 Weeks Later. Who here does not know about 28 Weeks Later? 20, okay. Who knows 28 Days Later? No?
There are two.
There's two of them. Well, I will summarize. This gives me a chance to summarize a movie, which is really still my favorite thing to do. So, 28 Days Later, you should all rent a Danny Boyle, British made, UK made film. 28 Days Later takes place in London at the beginning of what is called a release of the rage virus. Essentially, it's a quite long story, but something that gets released called the rage virus. And what it does is it turns people into very fast, very efficient, very violent zombies. Now, the word zombies is never used. They're called infected. We could get into an argument where there are not actual zombies, and I have had those arguments before. You cannot win those arguments with me. I will say, I teach monster films. You cannot win that argument with me. I will say that for all intents and purposes, they reinvent what zombies are. But they are called infected, and this is very important. So essentially, they run around really fast, and they bite. And if there is any sort of blood contact, you turn into the infected, and you again essentially just lose control. So at the end of 28 days later, the infected, the zombies, die off because they don't have anyone else to bite. And then the second movie was released in 2004, 2005, I believe, or a little later than that, was called 28 Weeks Later. And it was a follow-up. So essentially after 28 weeks, after the last infected dies off, the United States, UN-led forces, because USA, occupy London. They take over London and they try to clean it up. And what they do is they form something called the Green Zone. Obviously, a filmmaker was not a huge fan of the Iraq War. Green Zone, and they start allowing certain numbers of fortunate former Londoners to come back to London, with understanding that they will stay in a heavy militarized, heavy surveillance Green Zone. Now, and there is snipers on every building, and there is a central control where a very tough American general is played by Idris Elba. There's certain ironies there. And so anyways, and so they try to keep control. Of course, they can't keep control. And the virus erupts again. And at some point, when the virus erupts, and it's at night, because of course, everything bad happens at night, and people are running around like crazy, and you can see, and snipers are trying to shoot the infected. And the command from the control center, only target infected. And they try to shoot, and they can't, and it's dark, and they can't see who they're shooting. And then at some point, Idris Elba says, we abandoned selective targeting, all targets are free. And then he looks straight in the camera and says, we've lost control. And at that point, snipers start killing everyone, obviously. And I love that scene, and I love that movie for what it illustrates, I think, very viscerally about what it means to live in the 21st century. Is that try as hard as we might to try to feel in control, we cannot. And at some point, we are going to have to face with the decision whether or not we have to abandon control and shoot everything. And this is especially true when we think about disease. Because again, I know that the conversation is global, there is a lot of hand-wringing, there is a lot of panic about what happens when the next big pandemic erupts. Part of the problem problem when the next big pandemic erupts is that we can't really close the boundaries of nation states quite as well as we could before. When swine flu came to the United States, there was a lot of conversation in press and in politics, and politicians, why doesn't Obama administration just close down the borders? Well, you can't do that because for one reason is that global trade will collapse. And you have to assess at some point when you want to abandon selective targeting, right? And apparently that moment did not happen yet. But there's a lot of conversation about this, and you see a lot of things emerging in the media, a lot of covers with lots of really scary looking chickens and pigs and other type of animals saying who will get us next, which animal will kill us next. I don't know. I don't know what you think, who's going to be next. My money is on cats. And I love cats, but I just think they're planning something. And anyways, and so you get these narratives in the media, and one of the movies that just came out last year is called Contagion, which I don't know who here have seen Contagion. No one? Yeah. You should rent it. It's tasty, and essentially Contagion plays out a scenario of what happens in the global world when the epidemic, when the next big virus, the next big pandemic erupts. And if you watch the trailers, there is this panicky line. Kate Winslet, very panicky, says, what does she say? She says, don't touch anyone, don't talk to anyone, stay away from other people. And this is essentially the narrative of paranoia that submerges the entire film. Stay away from it, don't talk to anyone, you don't know where anyone been. And essentially, but what's interesting about that movie, and what's interesting about the global narratives of pandemics now and how they're different from the narratives of 20th century is how much they have been affected by globalization. Both for better and for worse. Because essentially what you're looking at is these narratives of pandemics that are essentially the entire countries are participating in all over the world. That it's not so much that United States has to deal with this disease and everyone else can sound off. But rather, I got my British expressions down. And anyways, but rather that there's this global move. The WHO, the CDC, the other global health organization end up looking really good in these films. And essentially, what you see is at the same time is this panic, the fact that we can't really do anything. That in the global world, we do not know when the next pandemic will hit, we do not know where it's going to come from, and there is very little we can do unless we are willing to kill everyone. I mean, quite honestly. Now, in this sort of a very pessimistic picture, enters the great promise of social media and digital technology. Because what you see as a response to this general atmosphere of panic is a response by the health organizations, and both private and public health organizations, to see how social media and digital technology can be used for the infected to keep track of themselves, essentially abandoning the need to shoot everyone. So the idea behind this move online to track epidemics and pandemics is specifically to say, look, we have all this technology out there in the computer. You don't need to touch anyone, you don't need to talk to anyone, you don't need to, what is that? You can stay away from everyone, and you can still be counted, right? You don't need to come to the hospital, to be counted, right? You can be online and be counted, right? This is perfect. So what you see is the emergence of things like Google Flu, which I don't know if you have heard about. Google Flu. Google, is taking over the world. One of the things they have done so well that CDC is the Center for Disease Control, the biggest health government organization in the United States, have actually started to follow them, is that they started to trend flu pandemics. And what they do is that they look at searches for flu across different, so they have this data, and they track where the searches for flu, like, so if you can't type in flu symptoms, right, Google knows. and Google tracks it. And they're actually able to predict with a great degree of accuracy of when are the epicenters of the next flu epidemic, just based on searches, based on looking at different, information that you put in online. Now, this is remarkable if you think about it long enough. It's scary if you think about it for another 10 seconds. It's really disturbing if you think about it for 30 seconds. Because Google knows everything. Just so that you know. That it does. I used to live near Silicon Valley. It really does know everything. So the idea is that then there was Twitter. And Twitter, again, there was this use of Twitter to, especially during the swine flu, to hashtag swine flu and hashtag H1N1. And the use of Twitter by people to say, hey, I'm sick, H1N1, again, used to track epidemics and pandemics. Same with, a little less with Facebook, but essentially things are going online. And the idea there is, again, this sort of a move and a promise. Look, if we can make this a trend, if we can make this somehow a part of our lives, then we can control things. We can finally get a hold of things. So you see the emergence of things like HealthMap. It's healthmap.org if you want to look it up, which is an organization, it's an organization, let's just say that, that essentially tracks all data from WHO, from CDC, from news stories, from what people post online, and from the data that people donate to it, to track disease all over the world. So for example, before I came to Edinburgh, I tracked what's happening here, which you all are gonna die of, right? And if you punch in Edinburgh, it comes up this really nifty map. It's a nice little interface with all these red dots or orange dots or green dots. And if you click on them, some of them are kind of silly. A child in such county, in such school was sent home with measles. Some of it is silly, and some of it is kind of frightening. So part of the problems of doing research in this area is that you can freak yourself out really, really, really quickly. And so you find this thing called from whooping cough. And supposedly in the UK, as of late, there has been a thing of whooping cough. And then you click on another thing, it's like cases of whooping cough diagnosed in pregnant women. Well, I'm pregnant right now, and oh my God, I was thinking of not coming. Like, I don't want whooping cough. And then you click on the link and tells you all the horror stories of what could happen to you. Now, part of the ways that HealthMap functions is that it asks you to sign up for it and to track your data. So if you're sick, you tell them you're sick and with what you're sick. As an offshoot of it is Flu Near You. And that's one word, flunearyou.org, with a nifty slogan of, do you have it in you? And what they are, you can't invent this. I wish I invented this. I wish I did. Do you have it in you? Now, Flu Near You, when you sign up for it, it sends me, it's really quite lovely. Every week I get a nice email from them saying, are you sick yet? And I am not kidding, that's actually what they ask. They ask you, are you sick yet? How are you feeling? Flu near you, how are you feeling? You open an email, say, have you had any flu symptoms? If you do, would you want to click on this link and tell us where you're at? And tell us what your symptoms are like. Now, this is a Silicon Valley project. This is a project aimed at making money. It is a project aimed at collecting health data. And the idea behind it is what you're supposed to have in you is not just flu, obviously, although that's helpful, but you're supposed to have in you the desire to participate in something like this. And when you watch a little video on their website, it says, we would like to give people a chance, an opportunity to participate in an open surveillance system. I don't know about you, but time anyone asks me that I have a chance to participate in a surveillance system, I get a little worried. But it's a chance, and it's viewed as such a promise. They would say we are trying to put the public back in the public health. We want to track the infected. We know the flu is happening, but we don't know exactly to how many people, and we want to know to how many people, and if this model is successful, we can apply it to future diseases and illnesses, and essentially we can track of the infected. And again, I've said this point before, and I will repeat it. Again, the promise is that then you don't have to kill everyone. You know where they live, right? It makes it more convenient. So, what I have argued, and I will not talk for much longer, I know we want to leave plenty of time for questions and answers. What I have argued is that what it does is create a different type of citizenship. Whereas the public health discourse in the 20th century have created, was very much a part of the citizenship, narratives of citizenship, such as the health of your body is the health of the nation. What this does is essentially asks you to become a citizen of the network. And the network in a larger sense and the network in a very specific sense. It asks you to donate your data, to share your health, to track your health within that network, therefore making that network healthier and making that network better. Now, the way that this works is essentially, if you donate your data online, first of all, you have no control over where that goes. You're all aware of that. But what's interesting about networks and the way that networks work is that the more information they have, the stronger they are. Networks, we can talk about Facebook, but in any networks, in larger sense or more specific sense, the health of the network is its data. It's how much data it has, it's how well it can share data, it's how fast the data can travel around. Therefore, as you're sharing your health online with the network, what you're doing is making the network healthier. This is different than cleaning your hands and washing your hands and making, your nation state healthier. There is an obvious move towards citizenship as a global citizenship in a global network. So you're not so much a citizen of the United States, you're not much citizen of the UK, of Uganda, or of anywhere else in the world. You're a citizen of that network. And with that citizenship comes requirements, there comes certain codes and certain moralities and certain imperatives, certain moral imperatives to share your data, to always keep donating your data, to always keep donating your health data. And what's really interesting to me about this is how this articulation of the self, articulation of our bodies, as always a part of the network, affects the ways that we understand disease, and more so the ways that we understand our control over disease and our control over pandemics. How much of that really has to do with this fear of this post-apocalyptic fears? How much it has to do with anxiety of the fact that so many structures that we have in place that have protected us before and are supposed to protect us in the future actually have no real power of protection. And how much the fact that the promise is that if you go online, if you go on your mobile and you download the Health Map app and you click whenever you're sick or you track where the sickness is, how much this is supposed to, and it is articulated as it is supposed to be something that will protect you. Now, having a mobile app on one's phone has never protected anyone from catching anything. I mean, it just doesn't. You can have whatever apps you have, but the narrative is that it will prevent you from doing something, from having something. And what it will prevent you is essentially from feeling at loss, from feeling like you have no control. Like what this does is actually give you a sense of control. And what my question is that how these different articulations of citizenship and our identities and our bodies, what does it do to that? What does it do to our understanding of who we are in the global world? And I will end now. Thank you.